Alright, Ceramics 1, today we're going to talk about your first project, which is your pinch pot monsters. First, we got to start off with a little bit of knowledge of clay and how to use it. Clay is made up of various natural and chemical materials that are safe to use when working with your hands. It has moisture in it that allows it to be malleable. Malleable also means to be able to work it or to move it around easily. It's not dry out. Clay explodes in the bisque kiln for 3 reasons. The bisque kiln is the first kiln that the first firing that we do to get rid of all the moisture so that the clay is prepared for glazing. So the 3 reasons why clay explodes, the first reason is it's too wet. So there's still moisture in the clay and it's not totally dry. What happens is if there's still moisture in the clay, when the kiln heats up, the moisture expands, because it's trying to dry too quickly and it explodes. The second reason is if the clay is too thick. If clay is thicker than 1/4 inch thick, it can hold in moisture but also trap air. So we never want to make sure that our clay or our projects are too thick. I'm not going to have you guys actually use a ruler to measure out the 1/4 inch, but it's something just to kind of keep in mind, like when you're pinching your pinch pot or when you're adding details, just be mindful about how thick either the details are or the pinch pot itself. And when you guys are making your pinch pots, I'll kind of come around and look at what you're doing to make sure that that doesn't happen. The third reason is when there's trapped air. Air can be trapped in the clay when it's folded or squished together and then reformed. When air is heated up in a kiln, it expands, and if there's nowhere for it to go, then it explodes through the clay. This is really important. You cannot take your ball of clay, flatten it like a pancake, and then fold it back together and then rework the clay into whatever shape you want it to do. What that ends up doing is it traps a lot of air, and the only way to get rid of it is to wedge it. And you're going to see what wedging looks like. However, due to COVID restrictions, I can't actually have you guys wedging to the full extent because we need wedging boards, and those wedging boards can't be used or shared throughout the 3 ceramics classes that I have. So you're going to watch the video on wedging to get some more knowledge as to what that should look like. And then if you do end up crazy messing up during this project and all your clay is gone, then maybe I'll have you wedge a little bit, or we're just going to have to get you new clay. So something to kind of think about, and it's really important just to kind of be mindful of what you're doing instead of just sitting there mindlessly and doing whatever you want to do. You kind of have to think about, okay, I don't want to trap air, I don't want to make things too thick, I want to make sure things are drying out. So let's just be mindful of that as we're working on our project. So we're going to watch this video on how to wedge. The woman in the video is my ceramics teacher from high school. So how she teaches it and how I would teach it is the exact same way. And she goes into a lot of really good information, and I'm going to be asking you guys some questions after the video is done, so make sure to pay attention.
Every piece of clay that you use for whether it's clay work or potter's wheel, anything that's going to go through the kiln needs to be wedged first. The wedging process is to mix different types of clay, wetter clay, harder clay, or stiffer clay. It's also very important that you remove the air pockets. The other thing is that when you're wedging, the plasticity improves, which means the workability of it. So we want to make sure that we do all of these things. We're going to start with some new clay, which is in the blocks. You're going to slice it up using your cutoff wire, and you just want a thin slab. You're also going to mix it with some nice, gushy used clay. And this will also improve your plasticity. You got to make sandwiches with it, and then you weigh it. You want it to weigh about 2 pounds. So if you have a little extra, you can cut it off and save that for later. Once you have the right amount of clay, then you're ready to begin wedging the clay. You're going to push the clay with both of your hands. And you want to stand so you're kind of like you're running, so that you're really stable and you're not leaning into everything with just your back. You're going to take your hands and put them like a tent. Because I'm right-handed, my left hand is going to do most of the work while my right hand guides it. My left hand will get on top of that clay with the right hand right beside it, push it down through the clay and out. I roll it back, I pivot it slightly to the left, and I put my hands back on top like a tent. Down and out, roll back, pivot up, hands on top. Down and out, roll back, pivot up, hands on top. Down and out, roll back, pivot up, hands on top. You keep repeating this motion until the clays are mixed together, making a good consistency, and so that the clay is plastic and has no air pockets in it. It's very important to remove the air pockets, that the clay always roll into itself. If you flatten and fold, you'll be creating air pockets. And that's not good. That's one of our objectives, is to remove those air pockets. So we do not want to create any more. You can see as you do this, you can get faster at it. And the clay will always walk towards your non-dominant hand. In my case, my left hand. It should also form the shape of a conch shell. This is where the hermit crab lives, or you can hear the ocean in the shell. This is the tip, and this is where you see the spiral. The spiral should always be under your dominant hand. That hand is just pushing enough to help out the other hand, but it's mostly the guide, and it stays on the spiral. It's more about lots of little pushes than pushing with all of your energy. Once you've done this a while and you can feel the clay starting to homogenize, become all like one mass, blend together, you can feel it get more dense, then you can test it by slicing it the longest way possible with a cutoff wire. Slice through, take a look. If you don't have any air pockets and your clay all looks very consistent, then you're doing a good job. Take a flat side to a rounded side, place them back together, and rework the clay. If you found no air pockets at all, then once you get back into your conch shell, you can slap it into a ball. This is the best way to keep your clay, so that no part of your clay dries out while other parts stay too wet. If you had trouble or found air pockets when you sliced it, keep wedging and ask for help as needed. All of your clay needs to be wedged and kept in a plastic bag with no air in it, so it stays nice and moist and ready for you to work for your next class.
Pinch pots are an easy, quick way to create a vessel out of clay. What is a vessel? Go ahead and tell me what a vessel is. There's no right or wrong shape of a pinch pot. As long as it holds its shape, then you're good to go. So notice in the picture on the left how the pinch pots are different shapes. That's totally fine. You don't need this quote-unquote perfect rounded pinch pot. I need you guys to remember that there's no such thing as perfect in the world in general, but especially in art and especially in ceramics. Everything is handmade and everyone's hands are different. So whatever your hand makes is totally fine. As long as it's thick enough and it holds its shape, then you're good to go. The tools we're going to be using. So this first tool on the left-hand side is called a sgraffito tool. This next tool that's metal is a toothed rib. Down at the bottom, we have our fettling knife. You guys probably can guess what this is. It's a sponge. I call it a little yellow sponge. I think it's pretty obvious as why. Over here, we have our wooden modeling tools. And lastly, we have our loop tool. All right, so what you need to bring to class next time I see you. A plastic, not glass, lidded container. Each of you are going to need slip, and you cannot share a slip container. And you're going to learn what slip is when you guys watch the demonstration video in a few minutes. Please bring an empty, cleaned container to class so you can begin making your project. If you do not bring a container to class, you cannot start your project because you need slip in order to attach pieces to your pinch pot. I'm asking for no glass because if it were to drop, I don't need it shattering in the classroom. And it's really important it has a lid to it and a lid that stays on. Because as you know, clay dries out, and if your slip dries out, it's going to be sitting for a whole week before you see it again. If it dries out, then you won't have slip for the next class. I actually prefer the peanut butter jars because it's a screwed on top, so it's definitely like a sealable, easy container. So if you'd like to eat a jar of peanut butter from now until then, and then bring it in cleaned, please don't bring in a dirty jar. That would be fine. You could also use like those containers, like the sour cream containers or yogurt containers, things like that. Or like your Chinese takeout containers, that's totally fine too. Just please make sure everything is cleaned. All right, adding details to your pinch pot. After creating a pinch pot, you'll be asked to add details to make your pinch pot look more like a monster or a creature. It could have horns, teeth, ears, eyes, nose, clothing, a tongue, maybe some arms, and so much more. So that's only a few examples. I want you guys to be creative and remember that a monster can look like anything. Monsters Inc. would be a good idea. Thinking about how maybe Sully was like super scary, but Mike Wazowski was more on like the silly looking side with the Cyclops. You're more than welcome to create your own monster, and you're encouraged to create your own monster. I don't want you guys copying someone else's creativity, which would be copying from another movie or like a magazine or a comic. So create your own version of what you think a monster would look like. All right, so now it's time to go ahead and watch this video on how to make your pinch pot monster. I go through all the steps, including how to make your pinch pot, how to attach pieces, and then also how to wrap up your project at the end of each class. So let's go ahead and pay close attention. Since we're not going to be starting our pinch pots till next week, I would highly recommend taking some notes so that you can kind of refresh your memory and have some ideas in mind when you come back next week. Timeline. So today is week 1. It's going to be your introduction, distribution of supplies, and then finding your shelf. I've already labeled the shelves for you. You'll find your shelf and put your supplies in your shelf or on your shelf. Your homework, remember, is to bring a lidded plastic container to class. Without this container, you cannot attach anything to your pinch pot. Week 2 is going to be making your pinch pot and beginning to add details, and week 3 is finishing this project, taking pictures, and then submitting it to the Google Classroom assignment. I'll also have you guys fill out a Google form that you'll self-assess and reflect while submitting those pictures. Keep in mind, this is 3 weeks, so it's really important that you're working hard during class. Clay dries out really quickly, and so after 3 weeks, this project's not going to be able to be worked on anymore. So you want to make sure to come to class every time and use all of your class time wisely. As always, if you guys have any questions for me, please do not hesitate to reach out. I'll be walking around during class, socially distanced, but I want to make sure that you guys feel prepared and confident while working on this pinch pot monster. All right, here we go.